Hey, today we're going to talk about 9.10, Human Impacts on Biodiversity. So take a moment, check out the Enduring Understanding, look at the learning objectives, pause the video, review the essential knowledge, and set up your Cornell notes. For the last time, because it's our last video. Excuse me. Okay. All right. Whew. Okay. So we've discussed this all year. So this is basically tying kind of loose ends together. But remember, we have HIPCO. And College Boards likes to use an extra P for population. But if we didn't have human population, none of these would really be a problem anyway. So I think human population is kind of redundant, so I don't include it. And you won't actually be quizzed on that, but we've talked about everything for the human population. Anyway, the H in the HIPCO. Remember, all of these can lead to biodiversity loss. The H refers to habitat loss or habitat destruction. And a lot of that comes from urbanization and or agriculture, both related to the human population. So deforestation, fragmentation, draining of wetlands, all of that is habitat loss. The I stands for invasive species. We talked about that. The invasive species are better at competition for food, for nutrients, for living space, for sunlight. They can outcompete native species and cause their population decline. For P, pollution, we had different types of pollution. We had air pollutants, which could contribute to acid precipitation. And also we have water pollution from oil spills, from pesticide release, which also eutrophication. But these can also contribute to biodiversity loss. What I am doing right now is giving a very brief overview of this, just to kind of refresh your memory a little bit. These are not FRQ quality responses. You would have to go into more detail, especially when we're talking about pollution. C, climate change. With climate change comes shifting biomes, changes in precipitation and temperature, and the habitat ranges will shift, typically towards the poles, and species will either have to adapt, migrate, or die. And finally, overharvesting. And overharvesting is from hunting, poaching, for taking too much of a animal or plant product without replenishing it. And we're taking it away faster than it can be replaced naturally. So, one thing that we did touch on earlier in the year, but I want to just reiterate that we have habitat fragmentation. And that's the disruption of a habitat. A physical disruption. So when you fragment something, you're breaking it apart. So we are disrupting this habitat where organisms will, interfere with their breeding, with their migration, and their hunting or feeding. So the impacts, well, large predators are going to need lots of hunting space. A lion has a range that is, several square miles, and it is a lot larger for a predator than it would be for an herbivore. Also, small populations of large case-selected organisms, they won't be able to find mates. Sorry, small populations of large. Like, for example, if you had a small population of elephants, they're going to have difficulty finding mates if you fragment their habitat. So ways that we can fragment a habitat. Well, by building a road or a highway, splits this forest into two. Adding a pipeline, for an oil pipeline, for example, will split a forest or a grassland in two. Agricultural land can break up a habitat. An urban area can break up a forest, and also logging or deforestation can destroy or break up a forest. Now, a lot of these you can use the forest as an example, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a forest. It could be any type of habitat. When you break up these habitats, you're splitting up the populations that reside in these habitats. So you're getting what is called a metapopulation. And a metapopulation, now don't really worry about the term, because I really haven't seen metapopulation show up on an FRQ or on the multiple choice practice, but what I have seen is the concept of it. So when you have a metapopulation, it's these isolated subpopulations. So in other words, with the subpopulation that's isolated, you're going to have less biodiversity. But with a metapopulation, these are isolated populations that then will have some sort of connection, like some sort of corridor that connects them to another population. So because of that connection, it can increase their gene flow and theoretically increase the genetic diversity. So cutting off a habitat, reduces the gene flow, reduces the overall biodiversity, but having some sort of connection between them will help to increase the gene flow. So in other words, we discussed this when we talked about island biogeography. You can have these isolated subpopulations and they're connected by some sort of corridor, whether it is a short distance in an ocean, whether it is a tunnel under a highway, something that connects them, that can allow them to interact with other subpopulations. So we have what is known as the edge effect, and basically the biodiversity of different habitats will be different. So we have, for example, here we have a grassland habitat and a forest habitat. Now, at the edge of each habitat, there is an increase in biodiversity, but also an increase in competition. So I know this is kind of weird because when you increase competition, you could decrease biodiversity. Well, there's more competition because you have these grassland organisms. Like you might have deer that feed in the grass, and then they set up their nests in the, and I don't mean nests like this, I mean like their den or whatever the deer, wherever they sleep. What do they call it? They don't call it a nest. Well, whatever they call it, their bed. Deer will find a little area in the forest that is protected. So deer might venture out into the grassland, but then might sleep in the forested area. You have some songbirds that are present in the in this periphery, and then you have some other birds that are present in deeper inside the forest. Now, the edge effect could be a problem when you fragment habitats, because at the edge you will have specific types of organisms that maybe will be detrimental to the overall population of organisms that live there. For example, certain songbirds prefer to live in the center of a forest. But when you cut up the forest and fragment that forest, these songbirds cannot really escape deep into the center. So they're living closer to the edge. Now at the edge, you have organisms like this guy, a brown-headed cowbird. And a brown-headed cowbird is a nest parasite. What does that mean? That doesn't mean they go and eat nests. It means that they will lay their eggs in another bird's nest and trick that other bird into taking care of their offspring. So they don't actually have to go through that. It's a very energy intensive process to raise offspring. So a brown-headed cowbird tricks songbirds into raising their young. These look like they're robin eggs. Robins are the birds with the orange breast, and they're brown. But that's the egg of a brown-headed cowbird. And again, brown-headed cowbirds are going to exist in this edge habitat. So every time you cut up or you fragment a forest, you still are creating this edge area around it, and that can add to increased competition, where some will be very successful and some will be less successful. In this case, the brown-headed cowbird thrives on this edge habitat. All right, domestication has also really done a number on overall biodiversity. So through the process of selective breeding, we have isolated particular traits that we want, and through thousands of years, we have actually domesticated a lot of organisms. The drawback is there is less genetic diversity because we're controlling the genes that are going into this reproduction. So they're more vulnerable to stressors, environmental stressors, and diseases. And we have seen this in the livestock that we have raised. And we have 8,000 breeds of livestock. Now that's like different varieties of pigs, different types of cows, different types of horses, sheep, chickens. All of this stuff came from 11 species. So if you think about it, we had the original cow, the original wild boar pig, a sheep, a goat, a chicken, a turkey. What else am I missing? Horses. I mean, that's 7 right there. So 11 species gave us 8,000 breeds. And each one of these breeds, they're adapted for local climates, for local environmental conditions. And you will focus on the overall productivity and the meat production, the egg production, the offspring production. And in some cases, the original organism from which the domesticated organisms were obtained have gone extinct. So even if I think the ancestral species that cows are adapted from or created from or domesticated from, they may be extinct. But that's something I have to look at. But not right now because I'm recording a video. Anyway, to mitigate biodiversity loss, one thing we can do is, we talked about this before, we can have national parks, any nature preserves, and legislation or laws passed to protect the individual organisms or the habitats. Another thing, and this is a big thing, is a wildlife corridor. So one thing that happens when you separate or fragment this habitat is you're creating an edge habitat, which is negative for the most part, but also you're introducing an opportunity for organisms to die. Now in this case, they could get hit by an automobile, but also, I mean, you're impacting their ability to reproduce. You're impacting their ability to feed. So by creating this wildlife corridor, you have an uninterrupted connection between these two segmented or fragmented habitats. So this is a way of reducing the biodiversity loss that comes with habitat fragmentation. Another thing we could do is have sustainable land use, setting urban boundaries, having infill. In other words, instead of building out, building in and building up. Establishing green roofs in urban areas, and probably one of the biggest ones is limiting our consumption of meat. Yeah, plant-based diet. It's easier said than done. We're Americans, we love our meat. It really is unfortunate because there is a lot of conditioning that we have gone throughout our lives. But, one thing to think about is, we need to vote with our pocketbooks. We need to vote and tell our elected officials to stop giving all these subsidies to these meat producers and start giving subsidies to produce growers, produce farmers. And one last thing is we could restore lost habitats. Now, restoring a lost habitat is a good thing, but it's not a fix all. Like if we have a old growth forest that has been deforested, it's a good idea obviously to plant another forest to replace that. However, old growth forests have particular biodiversity that's not found in younger forests. Like for example, there is the northern spotted owl. I had to think for a second. The northern spotted owl is found in old growth forests, and they're not found in younger forests. So with old growth forests, you have years and years of succession, that's ecological succession that has many intricate food webs that are present. So certain organisms will only be found in old growth forests. However, restoring a lost habitat is better than not having that habitat. Okay, so there was a lot of stuff in here, a lot of review. Hopefully all of this is review, a couple of new things, but it's been a pleasure. Every single one of these videos was a pleasure to make. Okay, most of the videos were a pleasure to make. And I really have enjoyed this entire year, so thank you for everything. We're going to close, and I'm going to ask you a question for you to do some introspection, thinking, and tell me. Explain how the changes you will make after taking this class will help to protect biodiversity. Notice I put will make instead of can make, because hopefully you will make some changes. So how will these changes, overall, how will they help to protect biodiversity? I look forward to seeing what you've written. I thank you for your attention during this video. I hope that it was informative, and I will see you soon.